Have you ever wondered why the people who seem closest to God often experience the deepest seasons of loneliness? Have you questioned why your spiritual growth appears to coincide with increasing isolation from relationships that once felt natural and comfortable? Have you found yourself asking why the more you pursue God's heart, the more you feel misunderstood by those around you, even fellow believers who should understand your journey? Have you ever felt like you're walking a path that seems to separate you from the crowds, the popular opinions, and even the well-meaning advice of friends and family who can't comprehend why you're choosing the difficult road of consecration and surrender? What if I told you that the loneliness you're experiencing isn't evidence that God has forgotten you or that you've somehow missed His will, but proof that He's drawing you into a deeper level of intimacy and preparing you for an assignment that requires the kind of character that can only be developed in the secret place of divine separation? Can you feel that ache in your spirit right now? That deep longing for someone who understands the journey you're on, the price you're paying, the things you're giving up to follow God's call on your life. That sense that you're walking through a valley that others have never entered, carrying burdens that others couldn't comprehend, and making sacrifices that others would never choose to make. You're not losing your mind, chosen one, and you're not being punished for some unknown sin. What you're experiencing is divine separation, a sacred isolation that God orchestrates in the lives of those He's calling to higher levels of service, deeper levels of intimacy, and greater levels of spiritual authority that can only be developed away from the distractions and influences that would dilute their consecration. Before we explore this profound truth about divine loneliness and its purpose in your spiritual development, I need you to comment 777 below as a declaration that you're willing to embrace the loneliness as preparation rather than punishment, as positioning rather than abandonment. This isn't just a number, it's a commitment to trust God's process even when it feels uncomfortable and isolating. And to those beautiful souls who have supported this ministry through super thanks, your faithfulness demonstrates that you understand how God uses the resources of the separated ones to bless those who are still learning to trust His process. And your generosity is creating space for others to find comfort in their own seasons of divine isolation. The concept of divine separation isn't a modern spiritual idea or therapeutic concept designed to make lonely people feel better about their circumstances. It's a biblical principle that appears throughout Scripture in the lives of every major figure whom God used significantly. This separation isn't arbitrary or cruel, it's strategic and loving, designed to create the optimal conditions for spiritual development that would be impossible in the midst of constant social input and external validation. Consider Abraham, who was called to leave not just his country, but his people and his father's household to go to a land that God would show him. This wasn't just a geographical relocation. It was a relational separation that removed him from familiar support systems, cultural expectations, and family influences that might have interfered with his ability to hear and obey God's voice clearly. The loneliness Abraham experienced as he journeyed to an unknown destination was the price of becoming the father of faith and the friend of God. Moses experienced perhaps one of the most dramatic examples of divine separation when he fled Egypt after killing the Egyptian taskmaster. For 40 years he lived in isolation in the wilderness of Midian, tending sheep and learning lessons about humility, patience, and dependence on God that he never could have learned in Pharaoh's palace. The loneliness of those wilderness years wasn't punishment for his impulsive act of violence, it was preparation for the impossible assignment of leading 2 million slaves out of bondage and through their own wilderness journey. David's experience of divine separation was particularly painful because it involved being hunted by the very king he had faithfully served. Years of hiding in caves, living as a fugitive, and watching his former friends turn against him created a loneliness that penetrated to his soul. Yet it was during these isolated years that David wrote many of the Psalms that have comforted millions of believers throughout history. His separation from human comfort drove him into deeper intimacy with God and developed the heart of a shepherd king who could lead with both strength and compassion. Elijah experienced divine separation after his dramatic victory over the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. Instead of being celebrated and supported, he found himself running for his life and sitting alone under a juniper tree, asking God to take his life because he felt completely isolated and misunderstood. Yet it was in this place of separation that God revealed himself to Elijah, not in the earthquake, wind or fire, but in the still, small voice that could only be heard in the silence of solitude. Even Jesus, the Son of God, experienced divine separation as a regular part of his earthly ministry. Luke 5:16 tells us that Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. He deliberately separated himself from the crowds, the disciples, and even the pressing needs of ministry to spend time alone with the Father. These weren't casual breaks or recreational retreats. They were essential times of spiritual refueling and divine communication that sustained him for the challenges of his calling. The pattern is unmistakable. Those whom God calls to significant service and deep intimacy must pass through seasons of divine separation that feel lonely, uncomfortable, and sometimes even painful. This separation serves multiple purposes in the development of spiritual leaders and mature believers, none of which could be accomplished through other means. First, divine separation removes you from the influence of voices that would compete with God's voice for your attention and allegiance. In our hyper-connected world, we're constantly bombarded with opinions, advice, expectations, and pressures from family, friends, colleagues, social media, news outlets, and countless other sources. While some of these influences might be positive, they can create so much noise that it becomes difficult to hear what God is actually saying about your life, your calling, and your next steps. When God orchestrates seasons of separation, He's creating spiritual silence that allows His voice to become clear and unmistakable. Without the constant input of human opinions and expectations, you're forced to develop your own relationship with God, your own understanding of His character, and your own confidence in His guidance. This individual relationship becomes the foundation for everything else you'll accomplish in ministry and life. Second, divine separation develops spiritual independence that prevents you from becoming overly dependent on human support, approval, or validation. Many believers never mature spiritually because they remain dependent on others for their sense of worth, direction, and spiritual confidence. They need constant encouragement, frequent confirmation, and regular validation to maintain their faith and continue their spiritual journey. But those whom God calls to leadership and significant ministry must develop the ability to stand alone when necessary, to obey God even when others don't understand or support their decisions, and to maintain their faith even when human encouragement is absent. This spiritual independence isn't pride or self-sufficiency. It's a mature dependence on God that doesn't require human props to remain stable. Third, divine separation creates the optimal environment for deep spiritual intimacy that would be impossible in the midst of constant social interaction. True intimacy requires time, attention, and freedom from distractions. Just as human relationships require private time to develop depth and authenticity, your relationship with God requires seasons of separation from other relationships so that divine intimacy can be cultivated. During these times of separation, you learn to find satisfaction in God's presence that you never discovered when you were constantly surrounded by people. You develop the ability to hear His voice with clarity that was impossible when you were always listening to human voices. You experience aspects of His love, comfort, and companionship that can only be known by those who have learned to be alone with Him. Fourth, divine separation builds spiritual strength and endurance that can only be developed through the exercise of standing alone. Just as physical muscles grow stronger through resistance training, spiritual muscles develop through the resistance of isolation, opposition, and the challenge of maintaining faith without constant external support. Many believers discover that their greatest spiritual growth occurs during their loneliest seasons, because these times force them to dig deeper into God's Word, spend more time in prayer, and develop spiritual disciplines that sustain them through difficulty. The strength developed during these separated seasons becomes the foundation for everything they'll accomplish when they're eventually released into broader ministry and influence. Fifth, divine separation prepares you for assignments that will require you to stand against popular opinion, cultural trends, and even religious traditions that conflict with God's will. Those who are called to prophetic ministry, apostolic leadership, or any form of spiritual authority must be able to stand alone when necessary, to speak truth even when it's unpopular, and to obey God even when it costs them human relationships and approval. The loneliness of separation seasons develops the courage and conviction necessary for these challenging assignments. When you've learned to find your identity and security in God alone, you become less susceptible to the pressure to compromise in order to maintain human relationships or avoid rejection. But understanding the purpose of divine separation doesn't make the experience less challenging or painful. Loneliness is one of the most difficult human experiences because we were created for relationship and community. The ache of separation can feel overwhelming at times, especially when it continues for extended periods or when it involves the loss of relationships that were once sources of comfort and support. It's important to understand that feeling the pain of loneliness doesn't mean you're failing the test or lacking faith. Even Jesus experienced the pain of separation, crying out from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The feeling of isolation is a normal human response to separation, and acknowledging the pain doesn't diminish your spiritual maturity or your trust in God's process. What matters is how you respond to the loneliness and what you do with the time of separation. You can either waste these seasons by focusing on what you're missing and becoming bitter about your isolation, or you can embrace them as divine opportunities for growth, development, and deeper intimacy with God. The key to thriving during seasons of divine separation is learning to see loneliness as an invitation rather than an abandonment. When human voices become quiet, God's voice becomes louder. When human comfort is absent, divine comfort becomes more real and tangible. When human relationships are limited, your relationship with God has room to expand and deepen in ways that would be impossible otherwise. This shift in perspective transforms separation from punishment to privilege, from exile to embrace, from isolation to intimacy. Instead of asking, "Why is God allowing me to be so lonely?" you begin asking, "What is God wanting to develop in me during this time of separation?" Instead of focusing on what you're missing, you start discovering what you're gaining. Many people who have gone through seasons of divine separation report that these were the times when they experienced the most significant spiritual breakthroughs, received the clearest direction about their calling, and developed the deepest understanding of God's character and love. What felt like the worst season of their lives in terms of human relationship became the best season in terms of spiritual development. The practical aspects of navigating divine separation require intentional choices about how you spend your time, what you focus on, and how you interpret your circumstances. Instead of filling every moment with distractions that numb the pain of loneliness, embrace the silence and solitude as opportunities for spiritual activities that you might not prioritize when you're busy with social obligations. This is the perfect time to develop deeper prayer life, more consistent Bible study, regular fasting, worship that isn't dependent on group settings, and meditation on God's character and promises. These spiritual disciplines become lifelines during separation seasons and lay the foundation for spiritual authority and effectiveness that will serve you throughout your life and ministry. It's also crucial to maintain physical and emotional health during seasons of separation. Loneliness can lead to depression, anxiety, and destructive habits if not managed properly. Regular exercise, proper nutrition, adequate sleep, and occasional social interaction are important for maintaining the emotional stability necessary for spiritual growth. However, the social interaction during separation seasons should be carefully chosen and limited to relationships that support your spiritual development rather than distract from it. This might mean spending time with mature believers who understand your journey, seeking counsel from spiritual mentors who have experienced similar seasons, or connecting with others who are also going through divine separation. The enemy will use seasons of divine separation to launch attacks against your faith, your calling, and your understanding of God's love. He'll whisper lies about being forgotten, abandoned, punished, or disqualified from God's purposes. He'll tempt you to believe that the separation is evidence of failure rather than preparation for success. Recognizing and resisting these attacks is crucial for successfully navigating divine separation. The truth is that God's love for you doesn't diminish during seasons of separation. His plans for your life don't change because you're experiencing loneliness, and His calling on your life isn't revoked because you're going through a difficult season. In fact, the intensity of enemy attacks during separation seasons often confirms that you're on the right track and that God is preparing you for something significant. The enemy wouldn't waste time attacking someone who posed no threat to his kingdom, so the very fact that you're experiencing spiritual warfare during your separation might be evidence that you're being prepared for ministry that will damage his plans and advance God's kingdom. Understanding the temporary nature of divine separation is also important for maintaining hope and endurance during these seasons. Just as pregnancy has a natural term and winter eventually gives way to spring, seasons of divine separation have beginning and ending points determined by God's perfect timing and your spiritual development. The separation isn't permanent punishment or lifelong exile, it's temporary preparation for permanent purpose. Those who successfully navigate these seasons discover that the depth of intimacy with God they develop during separation becomes the foundation for all their future relationships and ministry effectiveness. When the season of separation ends, it usually doesn't mean returning to your previous relationships and circumstances unchanged. Instead, you emerge with new spiritual authority, deeper wisdom, greater compassion, and clearer understanding of your calling that transforms how you relate to others and how you approach ministry opportunities. Many people discover that the relationships they form after divine separation are deeper, more meaningful, and more spiritually productive than those they had before. Their ability to discern character, recognize spiritual maturity, and connect with others at a heart level has been enhanced by their time alone with God. The ministry that flows from seasons of divine separation also carries a different quality than ministry that comes from other sources. Those who have learned to find God in the silence can help others hear His voice above the noise. Those who have experienced divine comfort in loneliness can provide authentic comfort to others who are isolated. Those who have developed spiritual independence can help others break free from unhealthy dependence on human approval and validation. Your current season of loneliness, difficult as it may be, is developing character qualities, spiritual sensitivity, and ministerial authority that will serve you for the rest of your life. The depth of your future impact will be directly related to the depth of your current intimacy with God, and that intimacy can only be developed through the kind of separation that removes all distractions and focuses your attention entirely on your relationship with Him. As we approach the conclusion of this encouraging message, I want you to understand that recognizing your loneliness as divine separation doesn't mean you should avoid all human relationships or embrace isolation as a permanent lifestyle. God created us for community, and even those who experience seasons of divine separation are eventually called back into relationship and ministry that involves other people. The goal of separation isn't to make you permanently isolated, but to make you spiritually mature enough to handle relationships and ministry without losing your connection to God or compromising your spiritual foundation. When you've learned to find your identity, security, and satisfaction in God alone, you can enter into human relationships from a position of strength rather than neediness. This enables you to love others without being dependent on their response, to serve others without requiring their appreciation, and to lead others without being controlled by their approval or disapproval. The spiritual independence developed during separation becomes the foundation for healthy interdependence in community and effective leadership in ministry. To those precious souls who have supported this ministry through super thanks during your own seasons of separation, your faithfulness demonstrates that you understand how God uses the resources of the separated ones to bless those who are still learning to trust His process. Your generosity is creating opportunities for others to find comfort and purpose in their own divinely orchestrated loneliness. If this message has helped you see your loneliness as divine separation with purpose rather than meaningless suffering, if you're beginning to understand that your isolation is preparation rather than punishment, if you're ready to embrace the separation as an opportunity for deeper intimacy with God, then take a moment to respond. Comment 777 below as a declaration that you trust God's process even when it includes seasons of loneliness. Like this video to help others who are struggling with divinely orchestrated separation. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss teachings that will sustain you through difficult seasons of spiritual development. Share this message with others who need to understand that their loneliness might be God's invitation to deeper intimacy. Most importantly, if you're currently in a season of divine separation, don't waste it by focusing on what you're missing or becoming bitter about your circumstances. Embrace the opportunity to develop deeper relationship with God, to grow in spiritual maturity, and to prepare for the assignments that require the kind of character that can only be developed in the secret place of divine separation. Your loneliness isn't evidence that God has forgotten you. It's proof that He's preparing you for something that requires the kind of spiritual strength and intimacy that can only be developed away from the distractions and influences that would compromise your consecration. The depth of your current separation is directly related to the significance of your future assignment. Trust the process, chosen one. Embrace the separation. Find God in the silence. Allow the loneliness to drive you deeper into His heart rather than away from His purposes. Your season of separation is developing the very qualities that will make you effective in the season of service that's coming. The loneliness you feel today is the intimacy you'll carry tomorrow, and that intimacy will become the foundation for ministry that touches lives, transforms hearts, and advances God's kingdom in ways that wouldn't be possible without the depth of character that divine separation has developed in you. The ache of separation is the labor pain of ministry being born. Your loneliness has purpose, your isolation has meaning, and your separation is sacred. God is with you in the wilderness, He's present in the silence, and He's developing something beautiful in the secret place of separation that will bless the world when the season is complete.